this is a time when we're looking at 4 or 5 graves for a week of doctors in our churchyard, just remembering the extraordinary work the medical profession in general do and honouring them at this time. And the last 3 days we've looked at those buried in the churchyard from the 20th century, a senior hospital administrator on the island, a doctor who died only aged 26, contracting an illness looking after a child, and a nurse who died aged 18. I don't know how she died, but it must be linked to her profession, we think. But this wonderful churchyard has got a history of many, many medical doctors buried in it. The rectory is just across from the churchyard. I feel very safe with all these doctors all around me. And that's certainly true of the 18th and 19th century. And often they were military doctors in the first instance before they retired. And we're at a grave, one of those difficult graves from the early 19th century, the man died in 1846, of a surgeon who was in the army. And he, in fact, his name is Isaac Robinson, and he was and fought during the Napoleonic Wars. And when either later this year or next year we dedicate our memorial in church to the nearly 60 people who were in the peninsula at Waterloo, his name will be on that list. And his sort of military CV is extraordinary. He began his surgical career in the army in 1794 with the British forces fighting then in Holland. He then went after that in 1796 to the West Indies. And in the West Indies at that time, British forces were often decimated by the contagious diseases that were indigenous to the West Indies, but which many people from Europe had to have faced before. And it was a very frightening, and the mortality rate was huge. And after that, he was in the peninsula from 1808 onwards and fought, or was there, in many, many of the battles in that long 6-year 1808 to 1814 war. And he was present at the Battle of Waterloo as a surgeon with the 17th Regiment. And then in 1830 he became Deputy Inspector of Hospitals. So by then it's a really senior position in the medical world. And we know very little about his actual life other than that CV. I do have a book here called Wellington's Doctors, and it just makes you realise as you read, this is the doctors who were with regiments in the Peninsular War and at Waterloo, just how extraordinary, hard and tough being a doctor in those days was. The hospital was so rudimentary. The army was on the move all the time. You'd find an old barn or somewhere, you'd set up, all the instruments, all the stuff you had for operations had to be carried by donkeys on panniers. The rest of the army, the military commanders wanted much more. They wanted ammunition and food for the troops, so the hospital doctors had to always fight just to have a little bit of stuff for their operations. And you'd have a field hospital literally near where the battle was, and then there'd be a brigade station further back, and long-term hospitals further back from that. And you'd have a battle, and suddenly, literally, a hospital with very rudimentary and very few resources, and perhaps 2 surgeons and a couple of surgeons' mates, you'd suddenly have hundreds of people coming in, and the hospital would overflow, and they would have to decide, well, over half the cases they couldn't help, so people were left just to die, and the others they would do most crude operations, often cutting off amputations without anything to deaden the operation. And this man here lived through all that. And I once again take my hat off in honour of our medical professions.